Leah Elson, welcome to the Bookaholic podcast.
Well, thank you so much. It's a delight to be here.
Yes, glad to have you here to clear up some stuff. so let me tell a little story. And this may or may not be related to you, but maybe it is a segue. So the other week I was watching, I think it's called Chicago Med. And so one of the parts of the story that evening was a young lady and her hand was bleeding, and they were telling her, oh, well, you need to come in the hospital and let us work on your hand. It's going to get infected, blah, blah, blah. She was like, no, I'm not going into a hospital because you guys inject people with stuff. And that's how my sister died. And she went to the hospital. She got scanned. I'm not going in a scanner. You're not going to inject anything in me, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And so they did manage to, be able to work on her hand, but she had other healthcare issues as well. So goes the story. So
Sure.
this character in this story, she was busy reading a lot of science fiction, if you will, not true science. She was reading all of these articles that was not written by scientists, not people qualified, full of myths, and it prevented her from getting health care. So I know some of the things in your book may not be necessarily related to this, but with what you have to offer us today, can we broach that subject about this fictional stuff that's going on with science, vaccines, if you will, and all of these things? How can we steer people away from these kind of thoughts and these types of things?
It is, I would say, an epidemic currently is the widespread misinformation in science and medicine currently. Science has a tremendous PR problem in the current
Yeah,
moment. And I think a lot of the origin of this is twofold, right? You have traditional media that capitalizes upon very inflammatory headlines, right? And so
hmm,
they will push something like something that I cleared up the other day as a science communicator is they had a big headline that said scientists are reanimating zombie viruses that have thawed out in the permafrost in Russia. So
oh my,
of course, this is an inflammatory headline. It drives traffic, and everybody's like, science, no, we don't need this right now.
right,
And so I
right,
had to come on board and say, listen, this is what they mean by zombie virus. It's not technically a zombie virus. They're reanimating previously unanimated viruses, and this is all this means. So you have traditional media that's capitalizing on inflammatory headlines, and then you have the widespread utilization of social media, wherein
right,
everybody can be granted a platform, even if they're not experts in the field. And so you have
right,
people that are either saying things that sound sciency and it's convincing enough to a general public that has a relatively large degree of scientific illiteracy, or they are citing publications that are not very they don't have a lot of clout in the sciences, right? These are not reliable publications. um
right,
and so people like me, we are desperately fighting this tide of misinformation and pseudoscience that
right.
is running rampant currently. And so, to your
Yes,
Chicago Med story, you have a lot of people
yes,
who I think at the end of the day, they're just trying to do what's right for themselves and their families. But how do you
right,
parse through this sea of misinformation, right? It's incredibly
right.
difficult. And so
Yes, very, um,
that's where
very
we
well
come in.
said. Yes, yes, yes. Well, hooray. So your book is titled, There Are No Stupid Questions in Science. So before we delve in for all that you may have in this book, how can we get some of those misinformation people to read your book and, maybe ask some of their questions that they're concerned about?
Well, I think that one of the primary things to take away from There Are No Stupid Questions in Science is that this book is not written from sort of a typical top-down nonfiction perspective, right? I am a
Okay.
scientist professionally, but it is not
Okay.
scientists lecturing to the public, right? all of
Okay.
these questions have been harvested from the public itself. So every
Okay.
single question in this book is actually coming from the public. And so it's
Oh,
questions that they want to know that have been crowdsourced from the people that need to know these questions, right? And so I love the format of that, and my science communication has always been driven under that premise, is teach the public and get them excited about science by allowing them to drive what they are learning, right?
got you. Got you. Well, let's say three questions from that book, and give us some of the answers. So, what's one of the questions that may have been asked in the book?
Oh, sure. So one of the questions is what the heck is dark matter, right? You hear
Oh,
about this a lot lately, right? There's been a lot of recent discoveries in the field, and you kind of see dark matter being circulated in news, et cetera. And so the answer to
mhm.
that is sort of predicated upon the way in which scientific discoveries evolve. So dark matter is a heavy-handed suggestion based upon observation, right? It is the idea that the mass that we can see in the universe, right? The mass in the galaxies, the planets, the stars, the nebula, things that you can actually see and you can image, there's not enough of that stuff around to justify the way in which everything comes together, right? So, the way in which mass sticks together and coalesces and forms these grand galaxies and webworks of superclusters of galaxies and planets and solar systems, it's all predicated upon gravity. Gravity is
Right.
driven by mass, but there's simply, when you calculate it and you do the math, not enough mass that we can see to justify all of these grand structures that exist. So, dark matter is sort of this heavy handed suggestion that there should be about 5 to 6 times more matter that exists in the world. And so, dark matter is sort of we think that there's something else out there keeping all of this clumped together under the force of
Oh,
gravity that we can't see. So, we call it dark matter. And you can
oh,
actually see areas when you take an image of the cosmos. You'll see these areas where we call it gravitational lensing. That is, you'll look at a galaxy and it looks sort of warped, like almost like you're looking at it through a drop of water, but there's no
okay.
mass around that area to substantiate why you
Oh,
would see this warpage of space-time. So there has to be a lot of concentrated mass of some sort that we
mhm.
cannot see, and so we call this dark matter, something we have not developed the ability to visualize yet, but we're pretty sure, 99% sure, that it exists.
Right, and I can see how just with the name dark matter, that would just drive people crazy, um, to see
It's
that, you
Oh,
know?
so crazy. Dark matter, and to say there's something out there we can't see, but we know it exists, right? That's a difficult thing for people to swallow. And so dark
Right,
matter, it sounds science
right,
fiction, but it is, I assure you, nevertheless true. Another
right.
question that I had, just sort of the basics, right? These questions all come from adults, is, why is the sky blue? And
Yeah, yes.
this is something that I think there's a bunch of misinformation on this. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's a reflection from the ocean," or "the ocean's blue because of the sky," etc. The sky is actually blue due to a phenomenon known as Rayleigh scattering, and that is the light that enters our atmosphere from the sun. It's called
Okay,
white light. It contains every color that we can see in the visible spectrum, right? That's your red, orange,
okay,
yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And
right.
because of what our atmosphere is composed of, there's all these little bits of matter and particulates and molecules and atoms floating around in the atmosphere. When that white light enters the atmosphere, it just so happens that the wavelength of blue light is about the same size as a lot of the particulate matter there. So it sort of gets peeled away out of that white light spectrum, and then it begins
Mhm.
to bounce around in the atmosphere. And so you get this sort of blue hue in our sky. And if you were to
Wow.
take that principle and apply it to a different planet, something like Mars, the reason that Mars sky is red is also due to Rayleigh scattering, because the particulate in its atmosphere is composed of a lot of iron oxides, and that peels away red. And so you get this sort of red hue. And I think Venus has a sort of whitish yellow sky, I believe, for the same principle. So
Oh,
Rayleigh
wow.
scattering.
Yes. Yes,
And
yes,
then
yes.
I think the last is why is blood red, and can blood be different colors? And the answer is blood is red because oxygen binds to iron atoms inside of the molecules that carry oxygen, right? And
Yes, yes.
this binding, this oxidation reflects red light really well, so we see blood as red. But something that is cool about this is that in the animal kingdom, octopi, they actually don't use iron to carry oxygen. They use copper. It's a better carrying agent in deep ocean water where there is
Okay.
less oxygen to be had. And so when you look at their blood, that oxidized copper appears blue. So octopi have blue blood. So you can actually
Ah,
have different color blood.
yes. Oh my gosh. I remember I remember being a kid, and that the why is the sky blue was
Hmm.
always a question that was running around. And I live here in North Carolina, and so when it's a cloudless day, we like to say it's Carolina blue skies.
Of
And I'm
course.
a and I'm
I
a
was gonna say,
graduate of Carolina, so
I
we
was gonna
just
say, I
take
see
that
your
as
North Carolina swag on your back wall there. So
yes, 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 yes. So I was going to take credit for the why is the sky blue, but see, you debunked that myth.
Listen, we'll say the sky is blue because of Rayleigh scattering, but also because it is a fan of North Carolina. So
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, Leah, why did you want to write this book? There are no stupid questions in science. We know that, as you mentioned earlier, science has a bad PR problem right now. But any other reasons why you wanted to write this book?
well, I think primarily it is because I have always been passionate about the sciences. I grew up, I was that nerdy kid that was examining rocks in the gutter sitting on the sidewalk, and I've always loved it. And I do truly believe that science is sort of a universal language, right? And
Mhm.
we describe the world around us through the language of math and science. And unfortunately, through my education, I've noticed that having a scientific literacy has really become a thing of privilege. And I think that that's incredibly unfortunate. I think that science should be for everyone. Everyone should
Yes.
understand the world in which they live in. They should have the tools to, you know, uh, understand how their bodies work and what's going on in the world around them and understand the cosmos. This shouldn't be a thing of privilege. And so I
Right.
wanted to start my author journey in a capacity where I made science accessible to everybody.
Yes.
And that is primarily the reason. And again, another reason why, rather than from an expert lecturing down, I really wanted to drum up what the public wanted to learn about, to help inspire them, to help answer the questions that they had. Because sometimes, as an expert, you can get very myopic in your field and you forget that some of these basics are unknown to the public. And so I'm like,
Right.
whatever you guys want to learn, you want to learn space, physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, I'm here. Ask away, please. Like get inspired, get excited. So I think that is
Yes, most
primarily
definitely.
the philosophic reason behind it.
Right, right, right. Well, back to science having a bad rap these days, and a non-understandable rap. You have the climate, and then there's people that believe in climate change or global warming. I didn't realize that was a thing, global warming as opposed to climate change, but we won't get into that because that's kind of politics. I learned that. But anyway, you know, and then some people don't believe that there's anything going on in our climate, but then we have climate activists. What would you, are there any activisms, within science that you're passionate about?
One of the biggest things I'm passionate about is ensuring that there is a better capacity and much more visibility for people who are traditionally minority groups to enter into STEM fields, right? So
Mhm,
just for
mhm.
women in general, only 30% of researchers worldwide are women, right? So there is a
Right,
resounding majority as male, and that number dwindles down even further for my ethnic minority partners in STEM.
right.
And so one of the things that I'm passionate about is in speaking with my colleagues, they say, what can I do to rectify this? One of the things socially I'm passionate about is be visible, right? Because if you can't
Right.
see it, you can't be it. I mean, I think of my own
Right.
sort of burgeoning excitement in the sciences. And if you were to ask me to describe a scientist as a young child, I would say, well, it's a gray haired, kind of starchy white guy, right? In a
That's
white coat.
that's
That's
right. Right. Right.
that's what I would say. And so I'm a very big proponent of, saying, well, what does a scientist look like? It looks like anybody. It can be anybody. If you're passionate about it, then you're a scientist. And so that's a
Exactly.
huge social thing. I always try to champion minority groups and people in my field to just get them visible and in the public eye. Science is for everybody. It should be. So socially,
Exactly.
that's a massive thing that I've always been a big proponent of.
Yes, most definitely. And yeah, one of the questions I was going to ask you, do we still have that thing about girls and math and science? And, I seem to think that there's more out there because I've seen, well, now my sons are young men, but STEM and STEAM, I see a lot of that, whether through groups or through schools. Thank goodness they even started that and mentioning that. So I'm hoping fast forward 10, 20 years, we'll see more people of color and women in the science fields. So I was just wondering if still we felt like there was a barrier somehow to young women, for an
You,
example of,
Sure, sure. I mean, I've been very open about it because I think that it's important to be. I think that people tend to canonize science, they tend to canonize medicine because this is the objective field, right? There should be no barriers, there should be no harassment, things like that. But this is something that if you
Mhm.
really ask women in this field, they will tell
Mhm.
you with conviction, like, no, we all still experience harassment, and there are still barriers predicated upon this imbalance and asymmetry in just gender distribution, right? And we don't
Mhm.
even get into the ethnic distribution that is so skewed as well,
Mhm.
and that also
Mhm.
presents layered problems as well. And so this is
Yeah.
something, a lot of us are trying to be outspoken about. I do see that the field is changing a bit, right? In my capacity now, the biotech company that I work for, I would say a very large proportion of our PhDs are women, right? Which is great
Mm.
to see. Our CEO is a woman of our biotech
Oh,
company, and so you're starting to see this, but there's definitely a past in which that wasn't the case. And if you
right.
I've been very vocal about it on social media, and you would be surprised the comments I get with women sounding off and saying, yes, this has happened to me. Absolutely. This is crazy. I actually, unfortunately, have had many women reach out to me and said, I deviated out of science and math or engineering because of the harassment. I decided I
Mm.
couldn't do it anymore. And that, to me,
Yeah.
that's tragic and that's unacceptable because not only is it just unacceptable in general, but you're losing so many bright minds that could have the
Yeah.
capacity to really change the world and contribute so
Yeah.
positively to this field simply because of social things that should be addressed. And it's 2023. And I can't believe we're even still having the conversation.
Well, it's 2023, but somehow we went askew, and it's like we went to time travel to almost
Mhm.
1956 there for a minute, and hopefully
Absolutely.
we're, so we've got people that are passionate about a lot of different things. We're going to have to just keep pushing until we actually are living in 2023.
Exactly. And
You know?
it's gonna take a lot of work, but I think that I have built a platform of people that follow me for the science, but I think it's important for those of us with a platform to use it for positive change, positive social change, positive scientific change, etc. So if anybody's out there, any of my other scientists out there have a platform, use it. Absolutely use it.
Exactly. Exactly. And one of the last things I'll ask you is that, science always seems so heavy. You can think back to school when you're a child, whether you're a male or female, and you're a kid in school, or no matter what your makeup is, math and science always seemed really daunting. They were
Sure.
always the hardest things. And for anybody to really get excited, what would you say to young people, whether male, female, whether whatever your background, what would you say to them to get them excited about maths and into science?
I mean, you know, a lot of it, it's difficult because the excitement is often drummed up from the people you learn it from, right? So,
Right.
you know, it's difficult to tell a child, "Hey, you're gonna learn differential calculus, and it's gonna be really fun," right? It's not. I've definitely taken it, and it's not very fun. But,
Right.
what's beautiful about math and science and what's exciting is that every single day of the year, multiple times a day, there are groundbreaking findings that are published, right? So if you are
Right.
somebody who is adventurous, if you're somebody who likes to be inventive, if you like to be on sort of the bleeding edge and the spear tip of things, if you like cool trends, and more importantly, you know, we live in an era of science and technology. We are currently in the era of science and technology. So if you want to
Right.
be sort of on the cutting edge of things and do things that shape the world around you, math and
Mhm.
science, the classes are daunting, but once you get past the basics, it starts to become exceptionally fun, right? It's like
Mhm.
anything, learning a new language, learning a new craft. When you first begin, I mean, you're at the bottom of a mountain looking upward, like, how am I going to summit this peak? This is enormous.
Right.
But as you start getting momentum and you go through it, I've always found the coursework through undergraduate, through my graduate degrees, et cetera, became easier and easier because you already understand the basic concepts, and it's just applying things to now these new cool findings that are so important and so critical. And, you know, everything is sort of a first now in science. You know, you can
Yeah.
study something and it is a first time. You know, there's
Yes.
sky is the limit in these fields. And so my suggestion to everybody is get through the basics, try to find a mentor or a teacher that is especially well known for making things exciting. Sometimes it's difficult, like I said, differential
Yeah.
calculus, there's really
Yeah.
no way to cut it. That's going to be boring. But I
Yikes.
promise the return in your career and the satisfaction and the way in which you can possibly really impact human lives or change the world is limitless. There's so many amazing things that you can do in this field.
Wow. Yes, yes. It sounds very exciting indeed. Well, Leah, do you have any other books that are going to be coming out?
Well, I'm working on several. This There Are No Stupid Questions in Science is my debut book, and that
Yeah.
is due for release June 27th of this year. So we've got about 41 days.
Oh,
Very
oh,
excited.
wow. Okay.
I'm ve
Yes, very exciting.
I'm very excited, but I am currently working on book number 2. This one is a bit more less question and answer and a bit more investigative nonfiction, a bit more traditional. And this
Mhm.
one looks to unpack what we started this conversation about, which is serendipitous, looks to unpack contemporary pseudoscience, specifically
Yeah.
contemporary pseudoscience that we're consuming, how much
Yeah.
it's making in profit and how little scientific substantiation there actually is for many of the things that are marketed to us. So
Right.
we're going to be sort of peeling back the layers of that as well, and you know, talking about the FDA and how there are sometimes these defunct government watchdogs that are supposed to be protecting us from things like this, but are so
Mhm.
overburdened or just don't have the kind of clout to regulate a lot of this that it goes overlooked. And we're talking sort of combined, the valuation is like $1 trillion industries that have no scientific substantiation, but we buy into it and we may interact with it or use it every single day, thinking
Right.
that it does. And it really doesn't. It's just a kind of a waste of money. So
Yeah.
that is my next endeavor.
Okay, that sounds very good. Well, so your book is titled There Are No Stupid Questions in Science. And again, it will be coming out.
June 27th of this year. So from the time of this recording, 41 days, we're almost there.
We're almost there. Well, we will certainly have all of your information to purchase the book and the podcast show notes and in the video description box of the YouTube channel, as well as your social media handles. Leah, thank you for joining the Bookaholic podcast today.
Deirdre, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.